Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in again. This is Truth Cat Radio at truthcatradio.com. The current time is 8:04 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's East Coast, USA. Although I myself am broadcasting from Chicago, Illinois, USA. My name is Richard Kary, and this is Beyond the Matrix. Well, we are very excited to be having as our guest today Ken Rohla. He's quite a fascinating man, to say the least. He's an educator, a natural health educator and inventor from New Smyrna Beach, Florida, specializing in rejuvenation and cellular regeneration, using raw and sprouted vegetarian food, herbs, food-based natural supplements, detoxification, emotional healing, reprogramming of limiting unconscious beliefs, ancient esoteric techniques, and cutting-edge science. Formerly, he was educated in engineering, electrical engineering, and computer science originally, but Ken had worked for 23 years in the medical industry, and he later became certified as a natural health educator in 2005. We're going to try to touch on a lot of topics, including a discussion of reverting GMOs, neutralizing radiation, and geoengineering. I just would like to stop for a moment before we get to our guest here, just to remind everyone that we are listener supported. We don't accept any corporate advertising. We're not monetizing at all. All the archives are free. So if you could, please support us. We have a support page, and we accept PayPal through our website, and any little bit helps. So please, whatever you could, just to keep things running here, would be greatly appreciated. Now then, hello, Ken. Are you still there?
I'm here. Hi, Richard.
Hi. Sorry to make you wait through the intro. Thank you so much for being with us here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Yes, I'm very excited to get to some of these topics. I gave a general, introduction for your past and your work. I don't know. 23 years is a long time in the medical industry. I know you've gone through seeing every level along the way, just to how everything works inside that, and that was a good preparation, I guess, for what you ultimately had as your career choice here.
Yeah, it was very much like college. Going to college was for me. What I really learned was what is known in those systems, and then I had to unlearn it and learn what really works and how things really are. And so in the medical system, I worked in hospitals, in emergency rooms, at the patient level. I worked at the policy level, the state and national policy level at the North Carolina Hospital Association. And so I saw the healthcare system at every level. And what I found was that that system is really good for helping with acute injuries, but for degenerative illness, it failed miserably. And because I grew up sick, I had to seek my own healing, and when I went and looked at the medical system, it didn't have the solutions. And so ultimately, I wound up discovering living foods, detoxification, emotional healing, reprogramming subconscious beliefs. And so because of my background in electrical engineering, I saw things in this field and in biology and medicine and natural health that other people weren't seeing. And I've always had an interest in quantum physics and the nature of reality. And so just this kind of unusual background gave me a very different viewpoint in the natural health world.
And yeah, you mentioned a lot in your talks and speeches too, the idea of mind control. I mean, there are a lot of topics we're going to touch on here that a lot of people out there might find a little hard to believe. So
Yeah.
perhaps a good introduction then is just for you to to give your impression of the kind of mind control that a lot of people don't even realize they're under. I mean, in this information age, there's also a great polarization, it seems, right now.
Yeah, it's very much, I see kind of the biblical parting of the ways going on in society. People are very polarized. There's a lot of anger too, because we have been very manipulated. And of course, the fundamentals of how we live on this planet are not sustainable. And so we're starting to see the effects of that and the self-destruction of ourselves and the planet because of it, and just because of very fundamental beliefs. And so we're kind of being forced to change. And, change isn't easy, and a lot of people don't like it. But the people that tend to be holding on to the old paradigm are suffering quite a bit in general. But yeah, with mind control, I first got exposed to the concept. I mean, my entire life, even when I was a little kid, I was always questioning the nature of my reality and questioning authority figures. In school and, Boy Scouts, for example, I remember taking a God and Country badge in Boy Scouts, and I had to meet with a minister every week and discuss the nature of reality and spirituality and those kinds of things. And the kinds of stuff that he was telling me just didn't make any sense at all to me, and I would ask questions like when they would talk about heaven and they would be describing heaven in very matter-of-fact terms, and I'd say, well, where is heaven? Is it like up in the sky? Is it out in space? Is it another dimension? Is it inside the earth? Where is this place? And these people couldn't answer. And the stuff that they were telling me just was nonsense, and it sounded like nonsense. And so, the same thing in school. The things I was taught about the nature of matter and energy. Even when I was in college, I wound up listening to what I was being told about matter and energy, and I took it for the most part hook, line, and sinker, but there were things that were unexplained in physics that, nobody had an answer for. And so I would think about things and come up with a solution and create a mathematical model and sometimes an experimental model and present it to my professors. And they would say, what the hell are you worrying about this for? You should be worried about getting an A on your test. And it wasn't until I met Linus Pauling and I showed him a mathematical model that I had for time and space that I got encouragement. He was very encouraging. And so that made me realize that most of the people that I was being educated by were just, like most people, they were maybe competent or adequate within the realm of their education, but they really didn't understand the deeper nature of what they were teaching. And so I guess it was in the early 90s, I got exposed to a woman named Kathy O'Brien, who had been a CIA mind control subject, and that kind of opened me up to the whole concept of trauma-based mind control, particularly government trauma-based mind control, as it was being used on subjects for various nefarious purposes, high-level drug couriers or high-level information couriers, assassins, sex slaves, various different uses. And it was difficult to wrap my head around what she was saying. It was difficult to believe that we lived in a world where such horrific things were going on. But as I started looking at it, I came across more and more people who were subjects of government mind control, and started meeting people who were coming to my workshops. I was teaching natural healing workshops, and I would teach about trauma-based mind control in my workshops. And every now and then I would get somebody in my class who had been exposed to it and could support the stories that these other people that were going public with it were saying. And so I had a lot of interesting experiences with that. And then, of course, I met Kathy O'Brien and spoke with her at great length. And she actually wrote a book called Transformation of America. That's TRANCE, Formation of America, back in the 90s. And she wrote it actually not as a book to tell the public. She wrote it for documentation for congressional hearings, because she actually went to Congress and exposed this in Congress. And so now it's pretty common knowledge actually online and with a lot of people. Back in those days, nobody really knew about it. Nobody wanted to believe it. And Kathy had a very difficult time, and other people had a difficult time bringing information out about it. But now it's pretty widely accepted in a lot of mainstream psychology and psychiatry. A lot of psychologists and psychiatrists know about it now, and some people are studying it and writing about it. But it's still a very covert thing within our government operations. But basically what they discovered, and it's been around for thousands of years, it's actually nothing new. You know, it's been in various forms around as long as people have been around. But in the last 100 years or so, it's really gotten heinous because during World War II, for example, the Nazis did a lot of horrific experiments on mind control, trauma-based mind control with torture and sexual abuse and drugging to see if they could create robotic people that would follow orders. And they discovered they could, in fact. And so when World War II was over and the United States, Great Britain, and Russia went into, or I guess at that time the Soviet Union, went into Nazi Germany after the war to get the spoils of war, we got a lot of their mind scientists, and so did the Soviets. And so rather than suppressing that research, the United States government and the military incorporated that into our military-industrial complex and expanded the research on it and did some really horrific and heinous experiments on people, usually against their will and usually without their knowledge. Sometimes it was individuals, sometimes it was on mass populations. And then also a lot of high-level public officials were involved very often in this as well, because these mind-controlled slaves could be used as sex slaves or information couriers, very high-level information couriers, because when you traumatize somebody, you shatter their mind and you compartmentalize their mind. When human beings encounter a trauma, the mind tends to disassociate and push it away and kind of lock it into a compartment and say, that wasn't me, that was so horrific, that wasn't me. And that's the mind's safety mechanism for dealing with severe trauma. And so when you traumatize people severely and repeatedly, especially if you're drugging them, then you can compartmentalize their unconscious mind over and over again and have many different compartments and many different personalities. And in fact, most of the time, that's what multiple personality syndrome is. It's not some naturally occurring event. It's a direct cause of trauma-based mind control. And so, you know, this stuff started becoming more public as some of these victims started breaking their programming with help from insiders within the military and in the intelligence communities. And so Kathy O'Brien and a woman named Bryce Taylor, whose real name is Susan Ford, they were really the first two to come out with any impact and get the information out. And so, you know, it made a lot of sense, but this is being used also in the masses, and it's been used, you know, as long as people have been around. I mean, there have been false flag operations thousands of years ago that political leaders used to manipulate public sentiment, but now we have a steady dose of trauma and drama in the news and in the media and movies and in all kinds of media. And that traumatizes the masses, and that makes the masses disassociate. And so they become dissonant to outside ideas and go with the programming, because one of the side effects of trauma-based mind control, or just trauma itself, is it opens up the mind to suggestibility. So this has, you know, been well known for a good 50, 60 years now in the United States, and it's been used heavily for that long to influence the masses. It's used in elections. It's used, you know, in television and movies and media, streaming media, all kinds of stuff all the time. And there's also newer forms now that we have digital media. There are types of frequencies that can be put into streaming media and streaming content that can also suppress consciousness and make people more compliant, complacent, and more likely to go along with the program.
And yeah, just to make sure that your belief of everything, including science, is what is best for the powers that be, basically.
Right, right. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, the best way to control a population is through its beliefs.
Mhm.
Wars and forcing people to do things against their will are costly and difficult. Whereas if you can convince people and have them ask for their own enslavement, it's much, much easier.
Yes, yeah, certainly, certainly. The more research one does, the more we see how this sort of shaping of our worldview is all around us. So I mean, yeah, one area that you've put a lot of attention toward is scalar waves in general, and that's clearly something that we don't learn about with conventional academia, and what is allowed among the public. I know there are exceptions. There are exceptions, but I mean, there's too small of the population. Like I'm sure most of the scientific journals and everything, they toe the line of the official belief of everything and that's scalar technology is pretty much excluded. So could you explain this to people who aren't familiar at all with scalar?
Sure. And in general, what I've observed over the years, because I've worked with a lot of advanced technologies. Back in the 90s, I worked with a man named Ewell Brown who developed water fuel technology and a lot of other really advanced technologies that could clean up the planet, neutralize radioactivity, power things non-toxically, clean up the air pollution, clean up water pollution, clean up, Fukushima, Chernobyl, things like that. But those technologies threaten the existing paradigm, the existing energy paradigm, for example, and also the existing weapons industry. Some of these technologies that can neutralize radioactivity, for example, there are actually 61 patents worldwide for methods for neutralizing radioactivity. And if people would like to see them, they can actually go to my website and see these patents. If they go to radiationlinks.freshandalive.com, they can see them. But we've had the solution for these kinds of things for many, many, many years. And I've worked with a lot of these because I've known scientists and inventors who develop advanced technologies. And then as I learned more about it, I started developing advanced technologies, including scalar energy technologies, which is just a modern name for a subtle energy that has had many different names throughout our history. It's been called prana or chi or life force or tachyon energy or orgone or all kinds of different names. And what it really is it is energy that it's actually light that's traveling through the cosmos, passing through everything like it's not even there. It comes from the centers of galaxies and it spirals as it comes out, and as it flows, it's spiraling and vortexing, and it branches as it goes. It fractals. So it's this spiraling, fractaling energy, and the waveforms are very different than conventional transverse waves, the waves that we're familiar with that normally become weaker and dispersed from their source. Scalar waves tend to start out with very large vortexes, kind of like an inverted tornado with the big open end. And as the wave progresses, it spirals inward on itself and gets smaller and smaller and folds in on itself, and it gets stronger and stronger. So these waves, rather than getting weaker as you go away from their source, they get stronger. And they have a lot of really weird properties. And so conventional scientists, because this energy is also, it's not conventional electromagnetic energy that we can see and measure. It's interdimensional or multidimensional energy that passes through multiple dimensions or frequencies of time and space. And it actually is what creates the physical matter in our universe and our physical reality, and also the electromagnetic energy that we can see and measure. And so this energy exists in between the particles of matter. Because, for example, if you take a hydrogen atom and you blow it up to the size of a football field, the nucleus would be about the size of a golf ball, and the electron out at the 100-yard line would be about the size of a pea. So you've got all this space in between, and that space is not empty as scientists traditionally believed. It's now known that that space is full of massive amounts of this superluminal light, or what some scientists are calling scalar waves or scalar energy. And so because it creates matter and it can alter matter and the electromagnetic spectrum, you can use that energy to alter matter and to have very significant effects. For example, like structuring electromagnetic radiation so that it's not as damaging to life forms. And so years ago, I was studying Tesla's work, and I was studying a man named Wilhelm Reich, who had discovered this energy in living organisms and how it flows into not only living organisms, but into dead spaces and creates life. And Reich proved that this energy, he took vacuum tubes with sand in them and heated them up to over 1,000 degrees until they were glowing hot, cooled them down. So inside the tube, there was a vacuum that was sterile, and discovered and examining them with very high power microscopes that life would spontaneously form inside these sterile vacuums, which supposedly, according to conventional science, is absolutely impossible. And recently, a Japanese study has proven Reich's work that actually does happen. And so a lot of the fundamentals that we've been taught about the nature of matter and energy and reality are being busted constantly. But of course, it doesn't usually get into the mainstream press or even the scientific journals, because it will interfere with the existing control paradigm, the existing energy paradigm, the existing political paradigms. And so this information, even though it's been known within militaries and governments for really thousands of years, it's not being let out to the public, and it's certainly not getting into mainstream news much. And so, in the beginning, because of my training in conventional school, I believed that it was all nonsense. But when I started seeing applications of it, real world applications that just had unbelievable results, like creating free energy, like creating electricity, that opened my eyes up to it. And then I started experimenting with it and wound up developing circuits and other devices that would generate that type of energy. They could be used for things like accelerating healing or protecting against electromagnetic radiation, or getting into deeper sleep, or improving plant growth, or neutralizing radioactivity, and on and on and on.
And I know you mentioned the power of our consciousness over creating our physical reality. So I mean in the past I've heard claims that, like, particles, they're only in the physical state when you're observing them, when you're looking at them, and then otherwise they're a wave. But I mean, this is going beyond that. This is saying that we're constantly creating our reality, and then there are some ways that we can tune in better and to have more control and be more sensitive to what is in our environment.
Yes, exactly. It's what it really is God consciousness, this energy that's flowing through everything, is flowing through the cosmos. It's from a scientific standpoint, scientists would call it superluminal light, which means it's light that goes way beyond what we've been told is the speed of light. We're told that the speed of light is 186,000 miles per second. But in fact, light can travel much, much faster than that. And when it does that, it appears to be invisible or black to us. And so scientists will call it dark energy or dark matter, black holes, and that kind of stuff. But it's really superluminal light, and that light has intelligence behind it. And I liken it to God consciousness. It's flowing from the centers of galaxies, and it's creates this giant intergalactic, interdimensional matter energy circuit. And it's like this web of black holes throughout the cosmos and the multiverse. So, this energy comes zipping out of the centers of galaxies, it's spiraling around, and it's relayed in our physical universe. It's relayed from the suns and the planets, because it's been discovered that inside of suns and the inside of planets, they have black holes or singularity there that acts like a relay for this energy. So this energy comes out from the center of the galaxy, and it's relayed from the large suns at the center of the galaxy outward from sun to sun to sun and to the planets. And so all of those bodies, they pick that energy up like an antenna and then rebroadcast it in a local area. And that's how this energy is spread throughout the cosmos. And as it turns out, we as human beings, our bodies are full of these webs of black holes. The acupuncture meridians, what people call the acupuncture meridians, are actually junctures of these superconducting minerals in the body that create these little black holes, these little mini black holes. And then also the brain neural pathways, we have these junctures of these superconducting minerals, and the DNA itself has superconductivity in it. And so all this superconductivity acts like a portal or an antenna for this energy that's coming down from our sun and coming up from the center of the earth. And so we are basically antennas that capture this energy, and then we rebroadcast it in a local toroidal field or a donut-shaped field. And so when you look at this, as above, so below, we have this galactic circuit of energy that creates a field around a galaxy that's shaped like a donut, and the energy comes out of one side of the galaxy and it spirals around and it's relayed around, and then it comes back into the other side of the center of the galaxy. And as it's flowing through the galaxy, it's flowing through the suns and the planets, and then they create their own toroidal fields, and then that energy is relayed to us, and we create toroidal fields. And then within our bodies, the cells within our bodies create toroidal fields, and the little black holes in the body, they create toroidal fields. And then it turns out that atoms themselves are these toroidal fields. And you talk about the particle wave duality, as it's called in science. Sometimes when you're looking at these fundamental particles, they look like particles, and sometimes they look like waves. And it's actually because this energy is flowing in these spiraling waveforms, and they actually are waves that are broken up into pieces that act like particles. So they're actually both. They're a particle and a wave, and they're calling them wavicles now in physics. But ultimately, that energy, when it's flowing into us, it's flowing in through the DNA, through the acupuncture meridians, through the brain neural pathways. And the brain is a big antenna that picks it up and rebroadcasts it out through the nervous system. So the nervous system is like an antenna for this energy, and it rebroadcasts it out around us in this localized field around us. And so we, in that sense, we're very much the hands of God, in that we're part of this galactic circuit of this God consciousness, and we pick it up and we rebroadcast it. And we as individuals have our own frequency that we affect this energy with, because of our consciousness, and also our physical body, how we take care of it and what we do with it. And so we bring that energy in, we rebroadcast it at certain frequencies, and therefore you can do things with it. The whole concept of like Reiki and energy work for healing is us capturing this God consciousness and rebroadcasting it and directing it through hands or other ways, so that we can direct it into people or living organisms and heal them. And that energy is scalar energy, but it because it creates and alters matter and electromagnetic energy, it can actually regenerate cells in the body. It can alter matter within the body and outside the body. In the case of people who have practiced techniques that can do that. So it's very interesting, and it's very empowering, and it's information that has been intentionally kept out of the public eye, because the powers that be do not want us to know how powerful we are at creating our reality. And so that's one of the things that I teach, and others teach, these techniques like yoga, Kriya Kundalini yoga, for example, meditation techniques, body work, breath work, various things of working with this energy, so that you can, for example, heal yourself, improve your life, become more empathic, more intelligent. Your genetic expression you can alter. And in the case of GMOs, which you mentioned, you can feed superconducting minerals to plants, because plants pick up this energy just like we do. And in fact, they do it even more so. Plants are energy to matter converters. We're matter to energy converters. We eat food, we eat matter, and we convert it to energy that we burn. Plants take in this scalar energy directly from the sun and the cosmos and convert it into their matter. And so they're very adept at using this energy. And that's why, for example, when you plant like an oak tree, you stick a little acorn in the ground, you get this giant oak tree with massive amounts of mass. where does that mass come from? You know, you don't have a giant hole in the ground. It's not converting the minerals in the soil into the mass. It's converting light directly into that mass. And so you know, we've got this synergistic relationship with plants, them being energy to matter converters and us being matter to energy converters. And so if you understand these concepts, you can actually do practical things in your garden, in your kitchen, for improving your life, improving your health. And those are the kinds of things that I teach, is very practical things that you can do with these big concepts.
And could you describe the Ormus minerals, or I know they're also referred to as monoatomic elements?
Yes. Yeah. Ormes, O-R-M-E-S, or Ormus, O-R-M-U-S, are just abbreviations for something that a man named David Hudson discovered in modern times in the United States within the last 20, 30 years. And it's just an acronym that he came up with. It stands for orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements. And what that means is, normally the minerals that we find in the ground or that we find in plants or within our bodies, they have particles that are composed of anywhere from a handful of atoms to thousands of atoms in a particle. When they're in small particles of just a few atoms, they're called angstrom minerals. And in conventional science, it's believed that these minerals cannot exist in the monoatomic state, where they're individual atoms not connected to each other, because all of these minerals, they're all metals. All minerals are metals, and they are crystalline, and one of their characteristics is they have a really, really strong charge, and they really want to bind to each other in some kind of three-dimensional grid pattern, you know. So iron or copper or steel or any metal, with the exception of mercury, which is a liquid, it's a little different. But the reason these metals have their metallic luster and their rigid capabilities and electrical conduction and those kinds of things is because of their atomic arrangement. These atoms connected to each other in a kind of a three-dimensional grid pattern of some kind. But it turns out, it's been discovered, David Hudson discovered this, and other people throughout time have discovered this. It's been kind of kept sequestered away in enclaves of secret knowledge, because the implications of this stuff is it creates technologies that can be very, very powerful. But it's been discovered that certain of these minerals on the periodic chart, certain elements, the platinum group and gold, silver, mercury, and copper, they can exist as individual atoms. And when they exist as individual discrete atoms, they all look like white ceramic powders. Even mercury, you can actually put mercury into this form, in this monoatomic form, and it becomes a white ceramic powder. And all of these elements, you know, rhodium, iridium, palladium, ruthenium, gold, silver, mercury, when they're in this monoatomic state, they're also very healing and rejuvenative or regenerative to living organisms. And so they actually occur within plants and animals and microbes and living organisms, and they create superconductivity that acts as the interface between the consciousness of the organism and the physical body of the organism. As I mentioned, these minerals plug into the DNA, which is a superconducting antenna that is an interface between consciousness, which is scalar waves, and the physical body. And then the neural pathways of the body, they have these nodes of these minerals that correspond to the acupuncture meridians. So the acupuncture meridians are deposits of these superconducting minerals that are these interdimensional interfaces between consciousness and the physical body. And then the brain neural pathways also have these superconducting junctures in them as well. And so you've got these interfaces between consciousness and the physical body. You know, you hear doctors talk about the mind-body connection. Well, if it's not all nonsense, then there has to be some mechanism where consciousness as an energetic form meets the physical structures of the body. And that's where it happens. It's in these superconducting minerals, or these Ormus elements. So if you understand this, you can create these monoatomic minerals. Nature creates them all the time in natural forms. Photosynthesis, for example, will create these minerals. Fermentation will create these minerals. Vortexing water in magnetic fields will create these monoatomics. And so in nature, the way this occurs in water, for example, when water is going through the hydrological cycle of the earth and it rains down upon the earth and it washes across the land and it washes across plants and it goes down into the soil, well, you have in healthy soil, you've got microbes that are eating the minerals and breaking them down into small particles that plants can uptake. And as it turns out, plants can only uptake these angstrom particles that are just a few atoms in a particle, or the monoatomics, the ormes, the individual atoms. And so plants are like natural filters for bringing these minerals into a form that we can then eat and ingest. And those mineral forms those are the only forms that our cells can uptake and build the structures of the body. So microbes in the soil eat these rocks, break them down into these angstrom and monoatomic particles. The plants uptake them, and then we eat them, and they plug into our bodies and raise the superconductivity as well. And because that superconductivity is where the mind meets the body, when you do this, it increases your empathic abilities, it increases your health, it's very regenerative to the body and the cells. It changes your genetic expression because, as it turns out, the DNA is not the genetic blueprint for the body of any organism, whether it's a plant or an animal or a microbe or whatever. The DNA is actually a superconducting antenna that picks up the genetic blueprint from consciousness itself, and it brings it into form. So the DNA is the interface where the genetic blueprint's coming from consciousness and then expressing through the DNA into the physical form. And so when you genetically modify an organism, you're actually shutting down and reducing that superconductivity and altering the structure of the DNA to change the genetic expression in the physical organism. But if you feed the organism these monoatomic superconducting minerals that are found naturally in plants and in natural water and in fermentation, in fermented products, then that will plug into the acupuncture meridians, it will plug into the DNA, it will raise the superconductivity in the body, and that will alter the genetic expression. And I have seen this done many times with clients back in the day when I used to work with individual clients. They would ingest these Ormus elements and heal their DNA and all sorts of things. You know, I had clients who were victims of radiation poisoning from Chernobyl, for example, that had severe radiation damage and DNA damage, and they were able to heal it and revert it back using food and plants and herbs and things like that, and these monoatomic minerals in their natural forms. And as it turns out, years ago, I started bumping into people who had discovered that you can feed these monoatomics to plants, to genetically modified plants, and the monoatomics will plug into the DNA of the plant and revert the DNA back to the original heirloom. And so I've seen this done more than one time, and it actually occurs naturally anyway over many generations. If you graft these GMO plants, they, over several generations, usually about 7 generations, their DNA will automatically revert back to the original heirloom. That's something that, you know, Monsanto and the gene giants don't want people to know about. But there have been experiments done also with, for example, genetically engineered fruit flies. They were engineered to be blind. And after several generations, they regain their sight. You know, the babies regain their sight. So, you know, the natural genetic expression is in consciousness, and it cannot be destroyed or altered. It's altered in the physical structure. And so knowing this, we can do the things that nature does by feeding these monoatomic minerals, which come in the form of volcanic minerals. So any kind of volcanic rock or rock powders, if you feed them to plants or to ferments, that's going to jack up the superconductivity in the plant or the ferment, and it's going to create all these Ormus elements, which you then ingest. It's going to plug into your DNA, or if you're feeding it to GMO plants, it's going to plug into the plant, and it's going to unravel the DNA back to its original form. And so that's actually how our body and our cells heal all the time. You know, cells regenerate all the time. And, you know, it's common knowledge within natural health circles and in biology that human cells, for example, the whole body replaces all of its cells about every 7 or 8 years. You know, cells die off and new ones are recreated. And the way that that those cells get the pattern. Let's say if your DNA is damaged or mutated, how does it get the genetic pattern to create the healthy cell? Well, there was a man named Dr. Thomas Bearden, who was a NASA nuclear physicist, who was studying how to neutralize radioactivity. And in his patent application, he mentioned that he got the idea from studying human cells, and he discovered that what human cells do is they actually will, when they regenerate, the way that the body gets the pattern for healthy cells, they actually send a scalar wave signal through these monoatomic superconducting minerals within the cell structures and in the body. They send it through these minerals, and these minerals are multidimensional. They're not regular 3D matter as we think of it, like normal minerals. They're actually interdimensional matter or metamatter, where a part of the mineral is the physical mineral that we see in our physical reality within our bodies or wherever, but the majority of that mineral is actually simultaneously existing in other dimensions of time and space. So it connects all these different frequencies or dimensions of time and space. And that's how it's able to bring this God consciousness into the body and alter the physical body. So it turns out Thomas Bearden discovered that the cells will send a scalar wave signal through these monoatomic minerals through time and go back in time and actually time travel into the past and get the genetic pattern for the healthy cell and bring it into the present to create the new healthy cell. And that's how cells regenerate. And so if you understand that, then you can feed the body these monoatomics, increase the superconductivity, and you can heal DNA damage, and you can accelerate the regeneration of cells. So it's a very fascinating area, but it has very practical applications that people can use in their kitchens, in their homes, in their gardens to have greater health and happiness.
Okay, and then can you expand a bit on the Ormus homeopathics?
Yeah, that's a very interesting subject. Homeopathy, for people that aren't familiar with it, a lot of scientists will poo-poo homeopathy and say that it's all nonsense and hogwash. But now there are actually heavy-duty scientists who are proving what's going on. For example, Dr. Martin Chaplin, if you really want to understand homeopathy and the science of it, you can actually just go online and Google Dr. Martin Chaplin, Chaplin, and water, and you'll come across his website in London. And I think it's the University of South Bank, London is where he's at. He and other people are proving what's going on with water, and that it's much more interesting than what we thought. It's not just chemistry as people think. There's also energetics, and water conveys information. And it turns out that water molecules, because water is a liquid crystal, the molecules, they like to bundle together in groups of 6 when water is in a healthy state. And so they will bundle together in groups of 6 and kind of do this square dance where 6 of them will kind of be hanging on to each other and doing a do-si-do, and then they'll let go of each other and they'll grab onto another 6 or another 5. And so they're doing that constantly, billions of times a second. But overall, when they're doing that, they're creating these patterns, kind of like snowflake patterns. And so those patterns actually convey information in the body that will either trigger a healing response or a disease response. So if you expose water to certain beneficial energies or processes, like photosynthesis or exposing it to the sun, the cycles of the sun and the moon, or scalar energy devices of certain frequencies, these water molecules will cluster into patterns that will convey healing information to living organisms. Conversely, you can also expose water to things like heat and pressurization, plumbing at right angles, and turbulence and stress.
Do I share something, Ken?
What's that?
Do I have permission to add something a little to your water?
Absolutely,
thing?
yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah, the thing about the H2O, which is really cool, and when you mentioned the liquid crystal, it's the same thing as the quartz crystal, only with the quartz crystal is silicon and carbon, and instead of hydrogen and oxygen, but they form what we call hydrogen bonds, where the hydrogens are attracted to the oxygen of the other ones, and they have each H2O will have up to 8 hydrogen bonds, and they when they all link up, they form a tetrahedral structure, which is exactly the same microscopic structure as a quartz crystal. And what this does is it forms channels, if you will, and the channels have a helical shape, but the actually will have a male and a female, clockwise and a counterclockwise helix. And so if you think of the energy as pachinko balls, and you think of the crystal as the pachinko machine, when you drop the pachinko balls in the machine, they all spin around and come out in a nice helical. They travel a nice helical pattern, and that's when they talk about the water being alive and all that. It's got the hydrogen bonds are all made, and it has that nice helical structure, which allows it to contain the intention and the energy, or become the chi superconductor, if you will.
Precisely, yeah. And that all goes back actually to the geometric structure of the universe. The energetic structure of the universe is geometric, and of course the physical is too. But when you there's a branch of study called cymatics, which is the study of frequencies. And it's been discovered, you might have seen some of these videos on YouTube of cymatics experiments where they'll take a piece of sheet metal and sprinkle sand on it and put a sound tone generator underneath it and dial through frequencies of sound. And when it hits certain frequencies, the sand will lock into geometric patterns. Normally it's all chaos until you hit certain key frequencies, and then boom, all of a sudden it locks into geometric patterns. And as you go higher up in frequency, those patterns become more and more complex. And what that is a demonstration of how energy actually at certain frequencies holds itself in geometric patterns. And so when you're talking about scalar energy, when it's going from superluminal light into physical matter, that's exactly it. Depending on the structures it's flowing into, it locks into these geometric patterns and creates these geometries. And if the frequencies are harmonious to living organisms, they lock into these geometric patterns that have benefits. If they're chaotic, or if their frequencies are not harmonious, then they will create structures that can cause disease or other problems. And so, yeah, so in a practical sense, there are many things that can affect water that way. Different kinds of energy and stresses to water. And so that has been dismissed as nonsense for many years. Now it's been known for millennia that you can take, for example, flower extracts or juices from flowers, put them into water, and then shake it and percuss it or shock it, not with electricity, but shock it with pressure or with sound, and then dilute the water and percuss it again and again, and dilute it again and again while you're shocking it and percussing it. And eventually what happens is you get water that's so diluted, there's no longer chemically any trace of the material that you put in there, but the water will hold that clustering pattern from the original energy of the material that was put into it. That's homeopathy. That's the whole concept of homeopathy. And so if you understand that, you can use conventional homeopathy to do that. You can also use different kinds of energy like scalar energy or sound to structure the clustering of the water molecules and create very healing water. And so one of the things I do is find and test devices like that will create really amazing waters. And so there are a lot of really cool ones out there now that have waters. For example, you can just structure water in a way that it will hold the patterning, and it can do things like cure cancer. And of course, unfortunately, because of the medical paradigm, you can't say that publicly. You can't make any claims about that. But in truth, I've met people who have healed themselves of major diseases simply by drinking water that was structured homeopathically in a very beneficial way. And so I find these kinds of water treatment systems and ways of doing this that people can do themselves or they can buy to have very healthy and healing water. And then I also teach people how to do things like fermentation in scalar fields and magnetic fields to not only homeopathically treat the fermented foods, but also to radically increase the levels of the monoatomic Ormus elements so that when you eat these foods, they're extremely healing. Or grow plants that are very high in these monoatomics and make them very healing. And it's actually very low-tech stuff. You don't have to have any high-tech whiz-bang machines. You can do it very simply with things like volcanic rock powders and magnetite sand or pyramids or various things. So that's what I've spent many years teaching people how to do and empower themselves.
Well, we have to stop just for a 5-minute break, but yeah, maybe we could hear you discuss a couple of those different options when we return.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. If you could just mute, and I will do the same for about 5 minutes.
Okay.
All right. Thanks. All right, everyone. Well, this is Beyond the Matrix with Richard Kary on Truth Cat Radio, and this is truthcatradio.com. And we are listening to Ken Rohla tonight. And we're hearing a lot of fascinating information related to science, health, energy, really where a lot of different subjects meet. Hello, Stephen.
Yeah, I heard you say break. I'm like, break? What break? Oh, jeez, break. Okay.
Yeah.
You can have a break.
Yeah, if you could, sir, and I'll be waiting.
All right, go ahead. Mute your microphone, everybody. Ken, mute your microphone. All right. Okay, as soon as this show's over in about an hour, actually about 50 minutes. Yeah, 55 minutes. I am... Oh, you're already muted, huh? Okay, well, good thing you told me. I am going to be coming up with the Stephen D. Kelly Show, and I'm going to be talking about everything that Trump has done in the last 3 days, 4 days, whatever it's been. That's my program, and I'm going to invite you guys to get involved and call in if you'd like. See how many people are listening here. Okay, hi there, everyone. So anyway, after tonight's show at the end here at midnight Eastern Time, that will be the end of the live broadcasting until we come back on Monday, and we're going to debut a new show. What? Somebody's trying to talk to me while I'm doing my thing here. Who's talking to me? Ken. I sound like Louis C.K. That's not good. Screw Louis C.K. I don't like him. He's a pedophile. Louis C.K., you listening? Anyway, when we come back on Monday, we're going to have a new show. I should pencil in here right now. But it's going to be called Soul to Soul. And it's going to have DeMarie Mulatiari is going to be the host of that show. All right, so if you don't know who that person is, you might want to check it out because it's going to be an interesting show. I don't have anything in the 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock slot, but at 10 p.m. Eastern to 12, we have Mystic Freedom with Dave Robbins, and I know his guest is actually Jolene Seebacher, but that'll be his guest. Now, on Tuesday, we come back on Tuesday, we've got Mind Matters with Ahmed Inani, that's at 6 p.m. Eastern. Okay, that's a TI show. If you have any issues like that, we definitely encourage you to call in. 8 o'clock p.m. is when Daryl Nichols comes on with his sister, and he does the Daryl Show. And he's followed at 10 p.m. by Madison Starmoon, which is hosted by Amanda Danielle, a.k.a. Madison Starmoon. On Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern, we start out with Lady of Light, hosted by Aurelia Helias. I'll probably be involved in that show. It's been quite an adventure lately. If you listen, you'll know what I'm talking about. She's followed at 8 p.m. by Mars Madness, hosted by Mars Theron, and at 10 p.m., Freedom of Joyce with Terry Joyce. Okay? I want to remind everybody that we are 100% listener supported, so please empty your pockets, dig through your couches, get some change. But no, seriously, we only take PayPal right now. Unless you want to send us your change in the mail, we can do that, I guess. But instructions on how you can do that are on the main page at www.truthcatradio.com, where there's a button that says Support Us. On that button, under that button, behind that button, there will be information such as our PayPal address, which is my name, Stephen Kelly, 714@gmail.com. That's STEVENKELLEY KELLEY 714@gmail.com. All right, not to confuse you, but if you want to communicate with Truth Cat Radio, the best thing to do is send me an email at law17gun@aol.com. That's LAW17GUN@AOL.com. Do not send any communication to the Stephen Kelly 714 Gmail. That's strictly for PayPal, and don't use the Law 17 for PayPal. There is a chat room that's open right now. You can go in there, visit the people that are in there right now, and say hello, register a screen name, and that's a great way to get that we can get to know you, etc., etc. Also, if you want to call in and share your stories about magical healing properties of water, I don't know, Richard, if you're receptive to that or not, but if you are, the phone number is 714-598-3125. That's area code 714-598-3125. All right, very good. Let me think. Okay, I think that's about it. I'm pretty sure I mentioned that we'd like you to send us money, but as far as Matt, if you're listening to this on a YouTube video, thank you for that, but please leave us a nice comment. All right? Thank you so much. All right, back with the show. Richard, unmute.
Hello, everyone. All right, thank you, Stephen.
I know what you're doing. You want to make sure there's a nice pause so that you can delete my speaking from your show. That's it. I know.
Oh, no. No, actually, I always appreciate your input, Stephen. But welcome back, everyone. This is Beyond the Matrix with Richard Kary, and you are listening to Truth Cat Radio at truthcatradio.com. We're speaking with Kenneth Rohla tonight. Ken, hi. Are you still with us?
I'm here.
All right. Well, thank you for enduring the break we had there. Yeah, you were
enduring the break.
Well, no, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people would be curious to hear you expand on what you were bringing up when we cut off there. You mentioned volcanic ash, for example, and also pyramids, a couple of different methods.
Right. Yeah, because I know it's like it sounds like all this pie in the sky stuff, but in truth, it's very down to earth things that you can do. For example, volcanic rock is very high in these monoatomics, as it turns out. And you can actually go on YouTube and search on Iceland volcano lightning or just volcano lightning. And you can see when these volcanoes erupt, there's all this lightning that shoots up out of the volcano into the sky. And of course, scientists are baffled. They don't know why that happens. But the reason it happens is because that volcanic ash is so high in these monoatomics, they create superconducting fields known as Meissner fields, or some people call it the Meissner effect. And that creates a huge amount of electricity that wants to ground out. And so it does. It grounds out in the atmosphere. And so you see this electricity shooting out like that. And so understanding that, you can take volcanic rocks and in particular volcanic rock powders, which are available for agriculture, and you can feed them to plants, and it will raise the superconductivity in the plant, which will increase the health of the plant, the nutrient levels of the plant, the heat and cold resistance, the insect resistance, and you get insane growth. You know, it's like right now I've got tomato plants growing in my greenhouse that we're feeding Ormus elements, volcanic rock powders and microbes and things. And our tomato plants are like 10 feet high and still growing, and they're just loaded with buds and flowers and tomatoes. And you know, everything we grow is like that. We get really nutrient dense, crazy amounts of food off of a very small space. And so specifically, if people want to learn about rock powders, there's a really good book called the Enlivened Rock Powders by Harvey Lisle, Lisle, and that will tell you all about rock powders and volcanic rock powders. But basically, you just take them like azomite or Jersey green sand. Those are a couple. Redmond minerals, another one that's widely available, and sprinkle it on your soil. And then normally microbial action in the soil will break them down and deliver them to the plant roots. And plant roots themselves actually will secrete chemistry that will attract microbes and also release humic and fulvic acids that will break these minerals down and deliver them to the plants. So you can accelerate that by watering the soil with microbes. And as it turns out, there's a microbial mixture that we sell called effective microorganisms, Dr. Higa's effective microorganisms, and it's really inexpensive. This stuff's like $25 a quart, and you only need about a teaspoon per gallon of water or less. And the cool thing is, with these microbes, you can actually brew them yourself. So once you buy a quart, you can actually take that quart and mix it with molasses and water, and you can make 5 gallons of it in 3 weeks. And so I teach people how to do that. And if people are interested in doing that, they can actually go to my website. There's a web page where they can download how to make your own probiotic, and it tells you how to brew that stuff and make gallons of it. The link to that is downloads with an S, downloads.freshandalive.com. So you sprinkle some of these rock powders on your soil, spray it with some microbes, and the microbes will eat the rock powders, break them down, deliver it to the plants, and you get crazy growth. And then you can also buy off-the-shelf Ormus products. There's a product called MyGrow Minerals, which you can get at mygrowminerals.com. That's MYGROW minerals.com. And it's very affordable. But these guys know how to make really powerful superconducting monoatomic minerals in a liquid form. You mix that in water and feed them to your plants, and you get crazy growth. So those are some of the practical things that people can do with growing food. I also will grow some things in hydroponics. I have some Juice Plus tower gardens, and Juice Plus bought this company that makes these hydroponic towers that you can plant plants in. And so actually the liquid feeds that they use in those tower gardens are high Ormus, and they're very good plant foods to begin with. But then I'll take and add the micro minerals, and I'll add the EM, and also sometimes I'll buy Ormus elements from humanagold.com. That's HUMANNA gold.com. So I'll throw all that into the hydroponics, and same thing, you get insane growth, you get insane nutrient levels. Dr. Joseph Mercola, for those of you that are familiar with him, Mercola.com. He's a neighbor of mine, and he got into sprouting, and he wasn't doing very well. And so I told him about all of this, and I just said, do these 4 things, get this, this, and this, and put them on your sprouts. And he did it. A couple weeks later, he called me up, and he's like, what the heck is this stuff? And I told him, it's like, this is Ormus Elements and Scalar Energy. This is what you're working with. Well, being who he was, he wasn't, he fed it to his sprouts, and he got crazy big sprouts. I mean, we get wheatgrass, for example, that grows like 16 inches high. It's nutrient dense, and it's super lush and green. And he was getting the same kind of results. But being Joe Mercola, he wasn't satisfied just having nice sprouts. He sent them off to a lab and had them analyzed, and found the nutrient levels were off the charts. And so that got him interested in that. But this is the kind of thing that people can do. Even if they're living on a high rise in the middle of New York City or Chicago or wherever, you can grow sprouts in trays next to a window, feed them these Ormus elements, and get incredible nutrient levels and nutrient-dense food in a small space. So that's one practical thing that people can do in their homes. Another thing you can do when you're making fermented foods like krauts or kimchi or kombucha, or kefirs, like water kefir or dairy kefirs, any kind of fermented food, you can mix these monoatomic minerals into the ferment. For example, there's a product called shilajit, which is actually a mineral resin that exudes from certain kinds of rocks. And people think it only comes from the Himalayas or from Russia, but actually in the southwestern United States and in the east coast of the United States, I see this stuff oozing out of the sides of rocks. It looks like a white powder, and people don't know what it is, but it's actually Ormus. So anyway, you can mix some of that. You can take a little shilajit and put it into, for example, cabbage kraut or the micro minerals, or not necessarily rock powders because they'll make it gritty, but any of these liquid Ormus minerals you can put into there, or you could take the rock powders and ferment them and put them in there. You can also, or like liquid sea minerals, you could take liquid sea minerals and put them in there and create Ormus. Another thing you can do is vortex water with these minerals in it, and it will break them down and create angstrom and monoatomic particles. And so there are two ways of doing that. You can either go online and buy a device called a water vitalizer, which is like $600, and it looks like a blender with a little propeller in the bottom of it, and it creates a really strong magnetic field around the base. And if you put mineral water, actually you can put distilled water in it, because it has a little basket in the bottom of it with mineral beads, but it vortexes the water in a strong magnetic field. And when you do that, that will break inorganic minerals down into the angstrom and monoatomic particles, which are 100% bioavailable. And that creates the Ormus in the water. And but you can also, if you don't have $600, you can do it yourself. Just go online and Google magnetic blender, and you can find instructions on how to build these little magnetic things that you can put on, basically super magnets that you can put with different polarities around the base of your blender, and you can do the same thing, and you can create Ormus water that way, which you can then either drink, or you can feed it to plants, or you can mix it into ferments. And so, for example, one of the things I do every day, I have a vitalizer, and I'll take all my supplements and I'll throw in some rock powders and some of these Ormus minerals and concentrates, liquid sea minerals, and I'll throw them all into the vitalizer, and I'll blend them or vortex them for about 27 minutes, and then I drink it. And it'll actually, like, I'll throw azomite rock powder, which is very gritty, into that, and it will actually break it down and make it much more bioavailable and create the Ormus. And it's very healing, regenerative, and you do that kind of stuff every day, and you'll have incredible health. So there are very simple, practical things you can do with these high and mighty concepts.
And you mentioned pyramids earlier. I know there's a number of products that you carry. I know there are the various items, but I don't know if maybe you could try to get some time to touch on those before the end of the interview. I know I wanted to be able to discuss the whole principle, though, of neutralizing and clearing the radioactivity and also the geoengineering pollutants. Because I mean, that's another thing. People can't believe that this is suppressed. We have the Fukushima incident now, and I mean, we're projecting so many results, so many years down the line from it, and this and that, and yet, for this to be hidden from the public, and just so people can understand the motives, if this can actually exist to neutralize the radioactivity. But yeah, you say that you definitely have seen it firsthand. You confirm it.
I've seen it firsthand with teams of engineers and physicists and 5 Department of Energy officials and several U.S. senators. And back in the early 90s, I was working with a man named Yoel Brown, and Brown developed a water fuel technology that was basically hydrolysis, where you send electricity through water and you split the H2O into hydrogen, oxygen, gas. But Brown did it in a very special way, where he pulsed the electricity at very specific frequencies inside of metal tubes of very specific alloys. And what that would do, alloys, not allies. And what that would do would create resonance inside of these tubes that would bring what scientists are calling 0-point energy, which is scalar energy, into the system. And that would inject huge amounts of energy that would break up the H2O into hydrogen and oxygen, then rearrange it back into HHO, which is a different geometric arrangement of the hydrogen and oxygen. And what you would get out the other end was a gas that was the 4th phase of water. It was actually not steam, but it was not liquid, it was not ice, which are the other phases of water. It was this gas that when you ignited it, it would burn with a blue flame, but it would implode rather than explode, and it would implode back into liquid water. And it did it with great force. And so Brown figured out how to use this for running engines on vacuums or mixing it with gasoline and radically increasing the explosiveness of the gasoline and making it burn much cleaner and things like that. And so, but in the process of doing all that, this gas, when you're burning it, it creates this blue flame that looks like a conventional, like acetylene torch flame, but it has really weird quantum properties. So it reacts with any material that it's exposed to at the atomic level, and it will actually rearrange the geometry of matter at the atomic level. And so, for example, you can burn things with it and convert them from one element to another. And in the case of radioactive elements, you can burn radioactive elements, and particularly with certain metals. I think it was aluminum and magnesium you could burn radioactive elements with, and it would convert them into non-radioactive elements. And some people think that that's impossible, because that sounds like alchemy, which we've been told is nonsense and impossible. But actually, all radioactive elements are doing alchemy all the time, because they naturally decay and break down into other elements. So it's actually not impossible at all. It happens all the time. It's just that it normally occurs at a much slower pace. So using this Brown's gas in this way, Brown figured out how to burn radioactive elements with other metals and neutralize them within minutes, and large quantities of it too, very highly radioactive stuff. And he wasn't the only one. I mean, there were many others, and you can see those, like I said, you can see the patents for them on my website at radiationlinks.freshandalive.com. For example, back in the 70s, I think it was 1975, there was an Arizona State physics professor emeritus at Arizona State University named Radha Roy. That's R-A-D-H-A, Roy, R-O-Y. The guy had impeccable credentials, and he developed a method for neutralizing radioactivity. And of course, it was suppressed, and he was attacked. And pretty much everybody who develops these gets suppressed and attacked, because it would spell the end to not only the nuclear power industry, but more importantly, the nuclear weapons industry, because you can neutralize weapons with this stuff. And also, that's just the tip of the iceberg. It also implies a physics that we are not taught that would create free energy. It would create paradigm-shattering technologies that the powers that be don't want out, because obviously the oil industry, they don't want to get shut down. The nuclear power and weapons industries don't want to get shut down. And so, our economies are based on that. So there's a very, very strong motivation for these countries who have the nuclear advantage and weapons. And I'm sure Stephen probably has a lot of interesting perspectives on it as well, for the motivations of why this stuff is suppressed. But it's violently suppressed. Ewell Brown ultimately was killed over this technology. So were other people like Stanley Meyer, who developed water fuel technology, and others. There was a man named Andrei Puharich back in the 60s and 70s. William A. Rhodes also developed this technology back in the 60s. It's been around since the 1800s. But so not only is this technology being suppressed for these reasons, but also the whole education process. Our understanding of physics, chemistry, biochemistry, all branches of science, really all disciplines are being manipulated and their education systems suppressed, because the knowledge of all of this would shatter the existing control paradigms on this planet. So that's my perspective on what's going on with it. Now, you were talking about pyramids. This energy can be picked up or tuned into with antennas, just like radio waves can be picked up with an antenna. And so pyramids and cones in particular are scalar wave antennas. There are all sorts of structures that are scalar wave antennas, but basically what makes a good scalar wave antenna is an electrical non-conductor. It could be plastic, it could be bone, it could be wood. Within our bodies, bone, which is high in these monoatomic minerals, is a really good conductor of it. And so is the DNA and other structures. But throughout the millennia, people have known about this, and that's why the ancients built these pyramids out of stone that was high in, guess what, monoatomic minerals, and other types of devices. The ancient Celts, for example, built these round towers, which you can still see out around England and Europe. That were these stone towers that look like these rook towers made out of stone that go into the ground a certain depth, and they come up above ground a certain depth, and they're made out of high Ormus stone, and those are scalar wave antennas. And what they do is they ground this energy coming in from the sun and from the earth, these natural frequencies that are very healing, and it imparts it into the localized area in the atmosphere, and it also imparts it into the ground. And so the microbes in the ground are happier, they produce more nutrients, and more, they break down more minerals in angstrom and monoatomic forms that the plants then uptake. So then the plants are stronger and healthier and happier. They're higher in nutrients. So then the plants, I mean, the animals that eat them are then higher, healthier and happier and more nutrient dense. And then, you know, human beings, whether they're eating plants or animals, they're going to be healthier and stronger in these kinds of areas. And this is not just limited to the Celts. All of the cultures around the world in ancient times knew about this stuff. This is why you see the preponderance of pyramids around the world and other structures, you know, and also structures like Tibetan monasteries, these medieval churches, you know, these Gothic cathedrals and things. They're made out of high Ormus stone. They have these archways and spires and roofs and spires that will capture this energy and collect it. And by the way, human beings, you know, we're natural antennas for it as well. And so, you know, the ancient people understood this. They studied it. They wrote about it. Modern times, heavy-duty scientists now are studying it and documenting what it does. There's a Russian physicist named Alexander Golod. That's Golod. And he had a multi-million-dollar budget. He worked for the Russian military. He was high-ranking and had impeccable credentials. And when the Cold War lessened up a little bit, he started studying pyramids, presumably for weaponry. But Golod was a very benevolent person, so he studied the benefits of pyramids and discovered they had many. They can neutralize radioactivity in the atmosphere. They can neutralize radioactivity in the ground and in groundwater for very large areas. He built a 144-foot tall pyramid outside of Moscow, which you can actually see on YouTube. And it's made out of fiberglass and wood, no metal in it whatsoever. And he proved that these things act like antennas that pick up this energy and then rebroadcast it in this toroidal field. And they also create a vortex, this double helix vortex of scalar waves that comes up out of the tip of the pyramid or an obelisk or a cone. And it sends this vortex. In the case of his large pyramid, it creates a vortex that goes out into space, and it acts like a vacuum cleaner that will pull these pollutants out into space or neutralize them, just alter their matter and convert them into non-toxic elements. And so Golod proved that and has done a lot of science on this. And other people like Dr. Konstantin Meyl, M-E-Y-L, in Germany, same thing. He was a brilliant man. He proved it mathematically and experimentally what was going on with this. He actually solved the unified field equation, which Einstein and his contemporaries could never solve, which is one equation that describes matter and energy at every level and every scale, from the galactic to the subatomic. And you know, you would think that Konstantin Meyl would have gotten the Nobel Prize or something, but no, in fact, he was scorned and ridiculed, as was Golod and anybody who comes up with this kind of stuff, because the moment you get into that area, then you start stepping on the toes of the existing control paradigm, and they will start funding shills and research to attack you and to disprove you and that kind of thing. But the science is out there on what this stuff does, and particularly Golod and Meyl are two, and also Dr. Thomas Bearden here in the United States has done lots and lots of work on this. He's got a series of DVDs, particularly for scientists and technical people, called Energy in a Vacuum series, proving experimentally and otherwise how to use this in practical applications. So increasingly this information is coming out, and increasingly the mainstream is picking up on it and creating practical applications that are just, in some cases, just unbelievable. I was speaking at a conference about this stuff about 3 years ago, and there's a company called Searle Magnetics that was created by a man named John R. Searle, who was an Oxford professor, who developed this magnetic generator that can create free energy. Basically, it's these very special magnets he designed, and you put them in concentric circles and you spin them around, and it basically creates this perpetual motion machine. And it's actually, it doesn't break any laws of physics. It's not a perpetual motion machine per se. It's actually bringing energy in from other dimensions of time and space. But it's a new physics that is not acknowledged by the mainstream. So I knew about Searle, and I knew about his generator, generating electricity and things. But at this conference, I just happened to serendipitously meet the CEO of Searle Magnetics, and he started telling me some stories off the record about it. And one of the things he told me about the generator was that it actually creates a singularity. It creates a black hole that they can put into a spacecraft, and they can get it going fast enough, and it will expand the black hole around the entire spacecraft, and then they can use it to do interdimensional travel or superluminal travel, where rather than propelling through space, they just blink out in one place and they blink in somewhere else instantaneously. Or they can travel around the Earth at around 60,000 miles per hour with no inertia or no drag, because of this singularity being around the craft. And he mentioned that a side effect of that was that when you create a singularity, it will neutralize radioactivity. And so, so there are very practical things that you can do with these devices. Golod showed the same thing. You can build pyramids and neutralize radioactivity. So these are the kinds of things that average people need to learn and know about and start doing for themselves, and not waiting to be reliant on some whiz-bang scientist or inventor or whatever. And that's what I've been teaching about for years.
Yes, you mentioned in previous interviews just some devices people can create themselves, just using what is it, like crystals and mineral powders and resin?
Right. Yeah. In addition to making pyramids out of wood or plastic pipe or whatever, you can make this material that's called Orgonite. That's Orgonite, Orgonite. It was developed by a man named Karl Hans Wells, or Wels in German. He's an Austrian man, really brilliant guy. And he was studying the work of a man named Wilhelm Reich. Wilhelm Reich was a contemporary of Freud's. He was a psychologist or a psychiatrist in Germany back in the early 1900s. And he was studying human sexuality and sexual aberration. And he believed that these aberrations were caused by some type of sexual energy. So he started studying this energy and ultimately discovered it wasn't just in the human biofield, it was all around us, and it was this superluminal light. But he didn't have a vocabulary for it at the time, because nobody, there was nothing in physics that explained this or described it. So he called the energy orgone, and he did a lot of really mind-blowing experiments showing what this energy could do for healing it, for example, and modifying weather. He built devices for modifying the weather, and he made it rain in deserts. He would stop floods or hurricanes or severe weather of all kinds with these devices he called cloud busters. And so Karl Hans Wells studied Reich's work and took the principles behind Reich's work and developed this material that he called Orgonite, which is made out of some kind of non-conducting medium, like a resin, like fiberglass resin or epoxy or plaster or something like that, some kind of non-conducting resin. And then he would put metal particles into it and crystals and sometimes crystal powders, powdered up crystals. And when you do that, it would generate that material. Once it would harden up, it would generate scalar fields and scalar waves. And you could build it in the shape of a pyramid, and it would, have the effects of a pyramid, creating a vortex out of the tip and those kinds of things. Reich had built these boxes that he called orgone accumulators, and he would put people in them and cure them of cancer and stuff like that. And of course, he was railroaded, and all of his technologies were taken away by the U.S. government, and he was thrown in jail, and he died penniless in jail, and they sequestered his technologies. Karl Hans Wells, developed this material, and he knew that if he tried to patent it, that he would be thrown in jail most likely. So he just open sourced it and gave it away. He did trademark it, but trademarked the name, but he basically started teaching people how to make it. And so now there are many, many thousands of people around the world that know how to make this stuff. But I found that even in discussing this with Wells, that he and Reich didn't really understand the physics of what was going on with this stuff. And there's a couple of things that go on that make it work. Because it sounds like absolute nonsense. Yeah, take a bunch of metal shavings and some crystals and throw them in a resin, and it'll make this subtle energy that can heal people. It sounds ridiculous, I understand, particularly from a conventional science standpoint. Until you understand scalar physics and even conventional physics, there's a phenomena in conventional physics called the Casimir effect. And it's the observation that when you take two plates of metal and you put them very close together, like a 1/16 of an inch apart from each other, they will generate an electric charge, but they will also generate scalar waves. And so in the case of Orgonite, when you're throwing these metal particles or shavings into this material, they're in close proximity to each other, and so they will create the Casimir effect, and that will create scalar waves. So there's one effect going on with this Orgonite material. Now, another thing, there's something called the piezoelectric effect, which an example of that is when you have a crystal, for example, like quartz, and if you hit it really hard, it can shoot out electricity. That's actually how gas grill igniters work. When you press that little red button on a gas grill to make it ignite, it's actually smacking a little piece of quartz that has a couple of wires connected to it, and it will shoot out a spark of electricity. That's the piezoelectric effect. But scientists don't really know why that happens. Well, the reason that happens is because all crystals have these monoatomic elements hiding within them. And because monoatomic elements are not like some normal matter that can be assayed in conventional analysis, they don't show up in conventional analysis. They actually collapse when you're doing, for example, spectroscopy, which is burning a material to analyze what it's made of. When you do spectroscopy on these monoatomic elements, they collapse into other conventional types of elements, and so they don't show up in the analysis. But they're there hiding in these crystals. And so crystals naturally are antennas for the scalar energy that's flowing through the cosmos all the time, and they act like little antennas, and they pick it up and they'll send out a localized field, and if they've got a termination point on them, they'll send out a little vortex from them. And as healers have known about this for millennia, and they've used crystals when doing energy work like Reiki, because human beings send this energy out as well. So if you put a crystal in the hand of a person doing this, crystals are oscillators, and they will modify the frequency of the energy so that it comes out the frequency of that mineral. It's based on the crystalline lattice structure of the crystal. And so different types of crystals have different frequencies and harmonics. And so when you take a crystal and put it under pressure, the piezoelectric effect kicks in, but rather than shooting out electricity, it has to be struck really hard to create electricity. But if you just squeeze on a crystal, it puts out scalar waves instead of electricity. So when you're putting these crystals or crystal powders inside of a resin, the resin dries up and hardens and it shrinks. It's squeezing on the crystals. So that puts out scalar waves as well. So you combine the two with the metal particles and the crystals inside of a resin or a material that shrinks, you're going to get scalar energy. And then if you form it into a shape like a pyramid, it's going to have certain effects, particularly if you tune the pyramid by its dimensions and its angles. You can tune it to certain frequencies, and they'll have very specific benefits. And so I've been teaching about that kind of stuff. Alexander Golod has been teaching about that, and other people have been teaching about that, and it's been known for millennia. So in a practical sense, people can take fiberglass resin from the big box home centers like Home Depot or Lowe's, and they can mix in macro crystals like kyanite or selenite or quartz or amethyst. Those are good ones to work with. There's also a really good mineral from Russia called shungite. You can take little chunks of that, or you can take shungite powder and put it into the resin. And then you can take, instead of metal shavings, large metal shavings from machine shops and stuff, which people typically do, I tell people to take metal powders. Like you can buy them on eBay, finely powdered metals like copper or brass or whatever, or iron, and put that into the mixture and you'll get the piezoelectric effect from the crystals, you get the Casimir effect from the metals, and especially if you form it into a pyramid, you'll get all kinds of really beneficial effects. And the key with the metal powders over the shavings is that the finer the powders, the exponentially more surface area you get of the particles coming in close proximity to each other, and that radically increases the scalar wave output of the material. It's kind of like if you take a jar, you take like a big glass jar and you fill it up with big marbles. The marbles are going to have a certain amount of surface area on them. And then if you dump them out and put little small peas in there, you're going to have a lot more surface area because there's a lot more peas in there with a lot more surface area because they're more tightly packed. So that's kind of the concept with these using metal powders over shavings. You're exponentially increasing the surface area of the metals, which increases the scalar wave production. So those are some practical things you can do. You can build large pyramids like Golod, but you really don't need to. I've built little 6-inch tall pyramids and put them out in my backyard, and like 5 of those will clear a 50-mile diameter if you build them right. And so this is what I've been teaching people how to do, is these very practical things that will stop chemtrails, it will stop nuclear fallout coming down on you, and other air pollution as well. I've done experiments now for 4 years doing this in different parts of the world, and what we see consistently is that the atmosphere will clean up. Sometimes because the vortex that these things create, it's like an upside down tornado of energy, and the big end of the tornado is down at the ground level, and the point is out in space, and it acts like a vacuum cleaner in the atmosphere, and all it does is pull pollutants out. It doesn't have any negative side effects whatsoever. It just pulls pollution out of the atmosphere. But when you pull pollution out of the atmosphere, as Alexander Golod proved scientifically, you balance the ionic charge in the atmosphere, and that normalizes weather. And so it also has other benefits. Golod showed, for example, that it radically reduces seismic activity, because what it does is it allows the Earth to have tectonic shifts constantly instead of building up and then having a big release. And so Golod showed that these pyramids would radically reduce seismic activity for hundreds of kilometers around the pyramid in the case of his. But you can do the same thing in your backyard. You can build little pyramids, 6-inch tall Orgonite pyramids. You could build a 5 or 10 foot tall or maybe bigger pyramid out of wood or fiberglass or plastic, and do all these same things.
Okay, so you would say that, I don't know, the best advice for someone on a personal level could be just for their immediate environment. But I mean, these devices, they are neutralizing and clearing radioactivity and geoengineering. Is that correct?
In some cases, if they're built right, yes. In some cases, they do. Golod showed that. If you go onto YouTube, you can see people doing it with what they call cloudbusters. Wilhelm Reich did it. I've shown people for years how to do it, making little pyramids. Because the way I discovered this, actually, there's a couple of things happened. I was, when the Fukushima disaster occurred, I suspected that it was a scalar wave weapon that created the earthquake, that created the tsunami, because of my background working with very advanced technologies and people that I had worked with. I knew about this stuff. So when I heard about it, I just went online and I Googled Fukushima scalar weapon, and one of the first things that came up was the Japanese Minister of Finance saying that the United States had used scalar weapons not only to create the Fukushima earthquake, but also to create 2 earthquakes prior to that, because the United States was trying to blackmail Japan into economic policies against China to keep the U.S. dollar to be the world's reserve currency. The reserve currency is the money that countries use between themselves to buy and sell things, for example, like oil. And historically, since World War II, the United States dollar has been that currency that the vast majority of countries use to do trade amongst themselves. But in recent years, countries have been developing alliances to change that, and in particular to make the Chinese yuanming the reserve currency. And so the United States has been there's been all this skirmishing behind the scenes for and against that, between the countries. So here's the Minister of Finance of Japan saying that this is what's going on, and the United States used a Scalar weapon to create the earthquake that caused Fukushima to blackmail the Japanese into these policies against China, which ultimately succeeded. Japan relented on that third attempt. And so I saw that and I said, well, if they're using this stuff for weaponry like this, then there's probably somebody who's figured out how to use it to counter it or for healing purposes. So I went online and Googled that, and I found out that, yes, in fact, people were, for example, like Alexander Golod and Wilhelm Reich and these other folks. And it just so happened that I was already manufacturing scalar wave technology. So I spent a year and a half experimenting around and tried different things. And we were already manufacturing these little pyramids for sleep. And my manufacturing guys had put some outdoors. They put 3 of them out on a picnic table outdoors to cure because they were a little soft and a little uncured. And it just so happened I was out mowing grass, and I looked up and saw this big fat chemtrail being laid. And the chemtrail was spiraling and flying apart and dissolving. And I thought, what the heck is going on there? And then I got back to the house and I saw those 3 little pyramids sitting out, and I thought, no way, that couldn't be doing it. But I looked up and I could see about a 5-mile diameter around my house was chemtrail free, and then everywhere outside of that it was all hazy and loads of chemtrails. So then I said, well, let me try an experiment. So I put a couple more pyramids out. There was a total of 5. I waited a couple of hours. I came back outside, and as far as the eye could see, the sky was blue. So I got in my car and I started driving around, and I drove about 35 miles before I saw the edge of the event horizon. And it was blatantly obvious. It's like hazy, milky white sky and all these chemtrails, and then boom, all of a sudden blue sky. And so that really woke me up to what was going on and what we could do. And so I've been teaching people how to do that. Alexander Golod has been showing people how to build pyramids in other ways. But they will clear chemtrails, they will clear nuclear fallout if you build them right, and they will clear all pollution out of the atmosphere, which then balances the weather, and you get normal weather for your area. Not these extremes that's being created by all this geoengineering that's going on. We talk about chemtrails. A lot of people think chemtrailing is a conspiracy theory, but in fact, if you go online and you Google geoengineering, or just go to geoengineeringwatch.org, or you can go to that radiation links page on my website, radiationlinks.freshandalive.com, you can see hundreds of patents for geoengineering technologies. You can also go online and Google owning the weather by 2025, and you can download a 67 or 57-page research report from the United States Air Force stating explicitly that they are studying these technologies for the purpose of controlling the weather globally by 2025. They make no bones about it. Congress is having meetings about geoengineering. So is the UK Parliament, so are other governments, and they're collaborating on it. It's not at all a conspiracy theory. There are geoengineering conferences. There are scientists talking about it. You've got a Harvard professor named David Keith, who is kind of the poster boy for this stuff, who's been out on mainstream television. He was even on the Colbert Report trying to convince people that we need to do this insane geoengineering, which is really messing up our planet. And, they say publicly that it's about trying to battle global warming or climate change, or whatever you want to call it, whatever euphemism when you use for it. But what it's really about is controlling the weather, suppressing consciousness, reducing population. They're putting things like desiccated human blood cells, which are dried human blood cells, with genetically modified microbes, or what they call cross-domain organisms in them, which are crosses between bacteria and fungi that are very damaging to human beings. And they're spraying them around the world to the tune of 16 million tons a year, or metric tons around the world every year, and they're admitting this. They're not admitting to spraying the geoengineering bugs, but I started seeing this years ago in testing, because when I would have clients, I was always testing them, and I would see these same three metals showing up: aluminum, barium, and strontium, which are reportedly in the geoengineering metal aerosols, and then also these genetically modified biowarfare agents. And I was using technology that could detect them and identify them most of the time. And so there's, you might be able to justify spraying metals in the atmosphere with helping trying to help the environment. There's no way in hell that you can justify spraying genetically engineered pathogens into the atmosphere for any kind of geoengineering purpose. And so this stuff is being lied about, it's being kept covert, and there's a huge spin campaign being put on to convince the public that it's a necessary evil. And then also, there's mind control going on around it. Old movies are having chemtrails photoshopped into scenes of the sky in old movies, and new movies are having them built in to the movies, not necessarily in the form of filming. I mean, they do film, when they're out filming, the chemtrails are global now, so they're naturally showing up in movies, but also in animated movies like Disney movies, like, for example, Cars. They're animating these chemtrails into the skies in animated movies and shows, so that it programs people's unconscious minds with the belief that they've always been there and it's natural, or that they're just condensation trails. And they're absolutely not. It's been proven. If people want to see the evidence, there are two documentaries. One is called "What in the World Are They Spraying?" The other one is called "Why in the World Are They Spraying?" And they've done plenty of science on it to show what's in these and how it's affecting the soil and the water and the plants. Aluminum, for example, when it comes down on crops, it stunts the growth of plants because it blocks the uptake of nutrients in plants. But fortunately, Monsanto has genetically modified crops that they can provide that are aluminum resistant. So there's the agenda there, I believe, going on of suppressing organics and promoting genetically modified food as well. There's many agendas in this. There's many levels of awareness around it, but it is most definitely not a conspiracy theory. And anyone who actually goes and looks at any of the information that I put out, or the ConnerCom Institute puts out, or Geoengineering Watch, or others, you can see mountains and mountains of evidence, patents, all kinds of stuff showing that this stuff is going on. It's not covert at all.
That's why I've heard a lot of different possible results, really, of this sort of geoengineering, spraying in the skies. I've heard some suggest a connection to altering DNA through that. I mean, have you heard this as well?
Well, it most definitely does. I mean, I've seen it in testing, but it's well known, for example, that aluminum, when it gets into the body and the brain in particular, that it blocks neural pathways. It causes neuromuscular disorders like Parkinson's and autism. It makes people more complacent. It dumbs them down. It causes brain function and memory problems. I mean, that's well known and well documented. And there's no way you can justify spraying these toxic metals. I mean, the effects are known. But then the same thing with these genetically modified biowarfare agents. Of course, that's all very covert technology, and the mainstream medical system and the scientific communities in general don't even know that it's going on. And so it's right now in the hands of a very small collective of people that are testing it scientifically. But absolutely, it changes the genetic expression. It makes people sick. It reduces population. It creates neuromuscular disorders. It dumbs people down. It makes them more complacent. Yeah, all of that.
Yeah, I've also even heard reports in some areas of these strange fibers that were growing on surfaces. And I don't know if it was just living organisms only that they were growing on, or what. But I don't know. Did you hear those reports as well?
Yeah, I've heard about them. I don't know what they are. You know, I've never collected them and tested them. I haven't been in any. I haven't been in any eras where they're coming down, but I have heard people talking about them. The Carnicom Institute has shown that some of them are what they call cross-domain organisms that are, you know, a genetic cross between bacteria and fungi, but they're not all that. Some of them are inorganic, and I don't know what all they are.
Okay.
You know, a conventional meteorologist would say that it's military chaff, which are metal strands that are sprayed in the atmosphere for testing radar or blocking radar and those kinds of things. But that's nonsense. That's not what this stuff is. Chaff is much bigger, much different.
Mm-hmm. And we have about, I don't know, a little under 10 minutes left. Did you want to talk about some of the products that you have available for people to check out on your site?
Sure. You know, the things that I mean, what I do, what the mission and purpose of my company and myself is to provide solutions for people to maintain their health and their happiness amidst all the craziness on this planet, whether it's geoengineering or radiation or GMO food or whatever. And so that comes in a broad spectrum of things. A lot of it is education. So, you know, if people want to learn about things they can do themselves, protect themselves, they go to my blog, which is freshandaliveblog.com. I teach people how to ferment their own medicines, how to detox their bodies, and how to do it themselves as much as possible with food and herbs and things. But I also either create technologies for some of these really nasty threats, or I find technologies and test them to know that they work. So, for example, probably of interest to people that are interested in protecting themselves from the chemtrailing and the geoengineering stuff and the biowarfare stuff, we have a really, and you asked about Ormus homeopathics earlier. We have an Ormus homeopathic on our website. An Ormus homeopathic is something, that's a term I coined, that is water that has these monoatomic minerals in them, and they have a very unique property in that you can program the water with scalar frequencies, and the Ormus elements will hold those frequencies permanently, very strongly, and then radiate those frequencies outward. So if you program them with beneficial frequencies, they'll have certain benefits. So there was a man named Fred Neal who discovered that he could take Ormus water and program it with the anti-frequencies, the scalar anti-frequencies of all known radioactive elements, and the water would then radiate outward these anti-frequencies. And because it's scalar energy, it can actually alter radioactive elements and make them non-radioactive. So that product is called Rad Detox, and I discovered that, and it used to sell, actually it does sell online still for $50 an ounce, but I found the manufacturer of it, and I talked him into selling it for a fraction of that, so we can get it now for $30 for 4 ounces. And basically you just take a few drops of this every day, and it goes into the body, and it will really help neutralize radioactivity, and then it will continue protecting you against it. So there's one product that's phenomenal for that. We also have some nanozeolites, which is a mineral supplement that's very effective at pulling toxins, including radioactive elements, out of the body. That product, zeolites are a mineral that's formed when lava hits water, particularly ocean water or underground spring water, and it kind of shatters the molecules, and they form these buckyballs. They form these like little geodesic domes or balls that have a very strong negative charge in them. And there's a company called Cosiva. You can ingest these rock powders, these zeolite rock powders, and they'll go into the body and they'll pull all kinds of toxins out, because one thing that toxins and pathogens and heavy metals have in common in the body is that they have a positive charge on them. And the zeolites have a strong negative charge. So they'll latch onto them and then neutralize the charge and flush them out of the body. There's a company called Cosiva who figured out that they could use vitamin C to break down the zeolites into individual cages, and that will make them, the cage is small enough that they can go anywhere in the body that water can go. So they can, for example, go into the brain and pull metals out of the brain. And so they become very, very effective at detoxing the body of metals, including radioactive elements. And certain people have had great success with that. And then we also manufacture scalar energy devices for various benefits. We have unpowered ones in the shape of discs and little, what I call hand grenades, that you can put them in your refrigerator. They'll make food last longer. They'll structure water. They can help ease pain and help all kinds of stuff. And then I have a powered scalar wave generator we call a rest shield, which is a pyramid that is a power generator, and it will put out a field that will improve sleep, get you into deep sleep states, protect against EMF, accelerate healing, and all kinds of stuff. So we've got a lot of different unusual things on our website.
Okay, great. Well, yes, just everyone be sure to check that out. And that's www.freshandalive.com, right?
Correct.
Okay, well, yeah, definitely I recommend all the listeners out there to check out Ken's website and see everything he has to offer and just all the information to share. Really, I just want to thank you so much for coming on. We'd love to have you again. It's been a great 2 hours. I'm sure everyone.
I'd be happy to. Richard. I really appreciate the work that you and Stephen are doing, and I know it's thankless work a lot of times, but the more people that are out there doing this kind of stuff, the faster the world improves.
Certainly, that's a great way to put it. All right, well, thank you again. It's been a great interview. Look forward to seeing you again, and have an excellent night.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. All right, everyone. Well, yes, that was Ken Rohla. Be sure to check out his website, and we look forward to hearing more from him. Well, this has been Beyond the Matrix with Richard Kary, and please, if you can, try to donate to Truth Cat Radio. We have a PayPal page for support donations. It's just pretty simple and very easy way to help keep things going. So yeah, please help out with whatever you can, just to keep everything running with all these hosts, guests, and shows we try to provide to you. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Stick around. In just a couple minutes, we'll have Stephen D. Kelly on with the Stephen D. Kelly Show. And we do look forward to hearing what he has to say tonight. I know we've had a couple of new people joining the network. There's going to be a debut show coming up on Monday. I'm just trying to get a message here from. Looks like Stephen will be with us in just a moment. All right, thank you, everyone. Transcend the construct. Regards.